reality is that joining in with what God is doing exciting things.
I like that way you just said. Joining in with what God is already doing.
That's my favourite definition of mission. Yeah. So the excitement, of joining in with what God is doing, which is exciting.
Yeah.
The restoration of the whole of creation. Yeah. So I think we can be hesitant about that because we think, well, can I play a part in this? Absolutely you can, because you don't do it in your own strength. And we can do it in all different spheres. We don't have to go halfway across the world.
Yeah.
Hey guys, my name is Filipe.
And I'm Nate.
Welcome to the All Nations podcast.
We seek to inspire, equip, and mobilize toward global mission.
Tune in as we share insights, stories, and practical steps on how you can make an impact around the world.
Hope you enjoyed this episode.
And today is a very special day. I'm very excited today, actually, to be with this person here in the studio. And this person is a person that actually has impacted my life so much. I've known him for about 7 years. His life is an inspiration for myself and for my family, me and my wife. My wife is a big fan of his, as they do. She's someone that she always looks up to him because of the same sphere of work that they do. So today we have with us Dr. I'm going to call him Doctor just to really mess around. Dr. Mark Galpin. He is a doctor. He's a teacher here, tutor at All Nations Christian College. Also specialist in community development. And I'm sure there's going to be an amazing time together, an amazing chat together. We're also going to have some fun. I've known Mark for 7 years now, and it is a privilege to be with him. So Mark, welcome to All Nations podcast.
Great, good to be here. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you with us. Now there was one thing that I have to confess here. That was quite funny actually. So me and Mark, we were together in Tanzania. I'm going to remember this. And we went out for a run in the morning.
I'm a bit nervous about the story you're going to tell now.
No. It's don't worry. It embarrassed just myself. All right. And I remember we went for a run early in the morning. It was very hot, Tanzania. And I remember that. So guys, I'm about almost, just about half Mark's age, probably about half Mark's age. And we went for that run. And I couldn't keep up with you. And I was really struggling to keep up with you. And then I remember saying to you, I've got a bit of pain on my knees and stuff, but actually, I was just struggling to keep up with you. So there you go, confession here at the All Nations podcast. But anyway, Mark, it's a privilege to have you with us, mate. And I look really forward to hearing your story. I've heard it a couple of times, but I really want to see what else we can get out of you and how you can bless our listeners today.
Great, thank you.
So welcome. So just start then, Mark. Probably just tell us a little bit about your background. And when I say background, not your professional background, let's go all the way back. How did it all start for you? How did when was the first time you actually probably heard God speak to you about mission? Were you a child? Maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about your childhood, and were you a missionary kid? Were you not? I know it all, but I'll just let you share it.
Yes, I am indeed a missionary kid, MK or TCK. So my parents were missionaries in Uganda with the Church Mission Society, CMS. They served for 16 years out there. So I grew up in that context, in an overseas context, in East Africa. Lived in a couple of different places in Uganda, have lots of memories that for me are quite normal, but for other people who've perhaps grown up in this country are very, very abnormal. So mission was always something that was part of my life, and living overseas was in many ways my comfort zone. What I found difficult was when I come back to this country, which was supposed to be my country, and felt totally, in a strange place, and yet looked like I should fit it in, but didn't fit in at all. And those were the really difficult times. So we actually returned to this country when I was aged 10, and my father had just passed away actually in Uganda, and so that was quite a traumatic period, and was a very difficult time of transition back to this country, but actually it wasn't back to this country because I'd never lived in this country, but it was coming back. So then through my teenage years, I was always interested in going back overseas. I went on a gap year with Interserve, and I spent a year in Pakistan teaching English. fantastic time, quite tough as well at times, but really fascinating to be in a completely different context. And then went to university, and after university, during my time in Pakistan, I remember being at a service up in the hills in Murray, visiting Murray Christian School, and there was a service, and somebody preached and gave a call to mission, and at that point I went up and sort of committed my life to...
So how old roughly were you?
So I was 18, I think.
18?
Yeah, about 18, yeah. Yeah, and I'd come to Christ for myself, obviously growing up in a Christian family, but come to Christ on a youth camp when I was about 14.
Okay.
So
do you think that when you... So let's say your childhood, and because you were living there in Uganda this whole time, do you think that sort of pushed you a bit more to go into mission later? Do you think what was...
It certainly influenced me. I'm not sure I'd use the word push, because that sounds like it was a reluctance.
Yep.
I think it was more just that, mission was not something strange to me. It was something that was in some ways my comfort zone. So it certainly made it an easier step than for somebody perhaps who'd grown up in their own country and in their own context, and then goes overseas perhaps for the first time. That's a big step. Whereas for me, being overseas was something that I thrived on. So it certainly made it a more natural and an easier step in many ways.
So then it was in Pakistan that you felt the call.
Yeah, I think I'd felt the call before that, but I think that was the point where I sort of stood up, walked to the front of the church, and made a statement to others, but also in my own heart that this is what I want to spend my life doing.
Okay. And how was it then after that then? So you committed there.
Yeah.
And then you got a whole life to decide to basically...
Yeah, so then went to university, and at university I was quite involved in a prayer group for Pakistan, quite involved in the Christian Union, and quite involved with... many of my best friends were people from other countries as well, because you naturally gravitate together.
Yep.
And then after university, I met my future wife.
So what did you study at university?
I studied environmental science,
Oh, wow.
but that was in the days before that was a real thing. It was for people who couldn't really decide between biology, geography, and it was a bit of a mix of those.
Okay.
So actually my final year, I find this interesting, I don't think anybody else does, but my final year was in what we call applied ecology. So applied ecology is basically about insects and plants and what they do to each other, how they interact. Absolutely fascinating. So that took me down a sort of agricultural route. And I was particularly interested in sort of natural methods of pest control and that kind of thing. I don't think you knew that.
Probably I didn't know that actually. Always learning something new about Mark Galpin. And then you met Liz.
Then I met Liz. Indeed.
And that changed your life for sure.
Absolutely.
For the best.
Yeah, indeed it did.
Yeah, she's
wonderful. Well, do you want to hear that story?
No, good man. We always have to, but I would really love to have story with Liz here, because sometimes we do get the couples changing a bit their stories.
Indeed.
But let's just hear your one with her. Tell us a little bit how
I was in my second year at uni, and I accompanied a friend of mine who I was sharing a house with to a freshers event, so freshers for new students.
Yeah.
He was a bit nervous going on his own, so I went with him. And then I was just unlocking my bike at the end of the evening, and this rather
So you've always been cycling your whole life then, into today, big cycler.
Yeah. So at the end of the evening, as I was unlocking my bike, literally, this very pretty young lady comes up to me and she says, and this is true, okay, I'm not... I've dined out ever since. And she said, "Are you the Mark Galpin?"
Oh.
Now, of course,
What has she been by that?
It turned out, I can't remember quite what I answered. I was probably completely flabbergasted. But anyway, I said, well, that is my name.
Yeah.
Who are you? Anyway, it turned out that she had just come back from a year out in India.
Oh, wow.
And she had been there with a friend. And it was a mutual friend, actually. And I had met that friend after I'd come back from Pakistan and before she went to India. and I'd given her various bits of advice about travelling in Asia.
Okay.
Generic Asia. How relevant it was. Anyway, apparently she had quoted my advice and mentioned my name. So Liz had heard my name and heard Mark Galpin, and so then
and that's where it all started.
Then she heard my name, and that's it took me actually quite a number of years to convince her to marry me, and I was otherwise occupied, as it were, at the time. So she digs me about that, but yes. But then eventually we did get married in 1995.
Wow,
and,
that's amazing. So you got married. After that, you had 2 kids.
Indeed,
Josh and Miri.
Yeah,
know them very well.
You've missed out a key bit though.
What key bit?
So after university, I went and lived in Uganda. Served in Uganda.
Okay,
for
let's go
3
back
years.
then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So share a bit about that one to us.
So I was working for a tiny little organisation called Christian International Peace Service, living in a very remote area, and we were doing community development work, but with the objective of underpinning and kind of firming up a peace agreement that had been made between 2 tribes that had been in conflict.
Oh, wow.
So the Iteso to the south, and the Bokora clan of the Karamojong to the north. So the Karamojong had stolen the cows of the Iteso, and then that had led to civil conflict and that kind of stuff. So this was the early 90s. So it was still rebel movement going on there, time of conflict, people in sort of IDP camps, and I was living with Ugandan team members from both sides in one of the sort of settled camps that they'd gone into. And we did things like rehabilitate agriculture, we did restocking of livestock, we hand dug wells, we did some health work and this kind of...
So a lot of practical
very
stuff,
practical
really.
stuff, but
That's
with the idea of fostering a sort of a positive engagement between these 2 tribes. So one of the key bits was resettling along the border area. So during the conflict, the border area had been abandoned.
Okay.
And so we went and set up our camp in this border area.
Wow.
And that gave other people confidence. And I went back there. Actually, I went back there with my kids 2 years ago for the first time since the 1990s. And there are now about 20,000 people settled along this border area. And that was partly because of that
spark. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was incredible. Yeah, incredible privilege to go back actually and see how God.
But did you actually see at that time? Did you actually see that happening already when you guys moved into that sort of, or was it after a couple of years that people started then to really start draw back in and sort of have that peace between the 2 communities?
So we had known that people wanted to settle back into the border area. Yeah. And so we had moved there, and with some people at that stage, but peacemaking is a very, very long-term process. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So after I'd left, actually, in one of those border areas, the base of our organisation was attacked, and actually some of the team members were even killed.
Oh wow!
And of course, then people abandon that area. So it's a long-term thing, but amazing now to see these settlements very established. The place we went to, it was called a Peitolim, which means 1 shade, because there was 1 tree there which cast this big shade. And we went there, we built some huts, and we started living there. And others did as well. Now there's a big health centre, there's all these trees that we planted, providing masses of shade. There are vehicles that go through there every day.
Really developed this.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's still very remote, but just complete change from what it was.
That's
amazing. It's 30 years later.
So at that point, you were married already to Liz?
No.
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay.
No, I had to leave this country in order to convince her that she liked me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you said we need to go back to okay, get it now. That's amazing. What a story.
Yeah. So incredibly formative time. I was ill with malaria most of the time, I think, but it was fantastic.
And that's awesome. That's a really awesome story, actually. And I've never heard that one, not even in class.
There we go.
So then you came back after that.
Yeah.
And then what happened then?
We got engaged. Liz came and visited. Got engaged soon after that. I came back with hepatitis A and was ill for a bit, but then got married after about 6 months of being back while I was doing my master's, Liz was training to be a doctor, so she was a junior doctor.
Okay.
And we lived in Reading, and had a few years in Reading. So a few years, and Josh arrived after a few years of marriage, which was great. And then when he was 1 year old, we moved to Nepal, and spent effectively the next 15 years.
And that's where I want to dig in a bit deeper into that, not just go like the next 15 years, more than just the next 15 years.
It's a few stories that could be.
Yes, I mean, I would really love to hear, so after that time then, so you just got married, had Josh. When did Miri come? Was it?
So she was born after we'd been in Nepal for about a year.
Okay.
She was born in Nepal.
In Nepal,
Yeah.
oh wow.
Yeah.
So I heard you do speak Nepalese, right?
I speak Nepali not very fluently, less fluently than I used to, but yeah.
Yeah, but I did hear
learn
you
as
speak
go.
Nepalese.
Yeah.
Would you mind speaking a bit for us here? I'll give you a sentence, a very deep thing to talk about. If you could just look into that camera and just say, I'm right here at the All Nation podcast with one of the most handsome men I've ever seen.
I could say that, but I would lack integrity if I did.
I'm just kidding, just to be a good bit. But I've heard you speak Nepalese, and actually I was surprised at the essay you got up and going up and speaking Nepalese. I was like, where did that come from? I've never seen that. But anyway, so then you spent 15 years in Nepal.
Well, we spent 7 years there initially.
Okay.
Then we came back. We were actually here at All Nations for a year and a half as missionaries in residence on a sabbatical.
So did you study here at Nations as well, or?
So I did a bit of teaching and a bit of studying. So I was never a student, which I regret. I wish I had done earlier. And then we went back to Nepal for another 7.5 years, and then came back here. So.
And the time you spent at All Nations then, was it a year, you said? Was it 1 year?
It was actually, so we came for a year. So we'd had 7 years in Nepal. It had been quite tough. So it was through the Maoist insurgency period in Nepal. So we had gone out there. My role had been to set up a community health and development project up in the far northwest, in basically an unreached area, no known Christians, no churches, some of the highest levels of poverty in the world, highest levels of maternal mortality in the world, child mortality. So very, very extreme poverty. So we went out to start the community health and development work up there, which we successfully did and worked up there. And actually there's work ongoing there. I can tell you more about.
That's amazing,
And then did various other roles as well. But it was through an insurgency period. The last few years had involved quite a lot of organisational change. And I'd been quite involved in that. Liz had had a tough time as well. So we had a miscarriage, which was difficult. So we came back pretty burnt out, actually, after that 7 years. And arrived here at All Nations. Didn't really know what we were coming to, although amazingly found out that some close friends of ours who we'd always said, we should go to All Nations together at some point. And then we found out that we were actually going to be at All Nations.
And
together.
they were here.
And they were here.
Oh, wow.
And they were coming at the same time. So that was amazing. And we ended up living side by side. And then we came back for a year, but after about 6 months, we realised that we weren't going to be ready to go back again in another 6 months.
Yep.
And so our organisation very kindly allowed us to remain. So we spent 18 months here on site. That's where I found out that I love teaching. Particularly All Nations students are so passionate and motivated.
And you do that very well, I could say, mate.
Thank you. And that led us to coming back later on. But the sabbatical year really, or 18 months, gave us the recovery time to enable us to serve for another 7 years, 7.5 years actually. And that was really special.
That is really so. Then basically, you say you were on Nations for some time, like you said, did some teaching stuff, and then you went back to Nepal.
Yeah.
Now I know of a situation you guys lived through Nepal, which was the earthquake.
Yeah, 2015.
Yeah. Was that before that, or was that after the time you spent All Nations?
No, so that was after. That was after. Yeah.
And would you mind sharing a bit? I know how you really struggled to share about that one. I would love to. Yeah. People could know how was the experience. So you actually were there when the earthquake happened in Nepal.
Yeah. So So I was coming to the end of my time as the executive director of United Mission to Nepal. We'd done 6 years. We had about 6.5 years. We had about a year to go. We're going to leave in June 2016. So I kind of felt like I'd done what God had called me to do in UMN. I just was going to, in my arrogance, I thought I'd just tidy up a few things and leave it all nice and neat for my successor. Okay. We were on a retreat, an expatriate retreat for our expatriates team members. We'd left Josh in Kathmandu and we'd gone across to Pokhara on this retreat. Josh was with some friends. He was about 15 at the time.
Oh wow! So it was Miri with you guys then?
Miri was with us.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'd gone out for a run in the morning in the rain, and then we were sitting in a room all together, and we'd had some sharing. Somebody had shared, and we were just discussing in groups. And I remember in the group that I was in, somebody, I forget, I don't think it was me, but somebody in the group said, "Isn't it amazing how God, in any circumstance, we always know that God is in control?" Mm. And at that very moment, literally, it sounded like the room started to shake, and it sounded like there was a train sort of coming over the top of us. So I realized what was happening. So I shouted earthquake, and in Nepal, because we're expecting earthquakes, we all know the drill. You're supposed to duck down, cover your head.
Yep.
And hold on to something. Okay. So I dived down, got onto the chair, held onto the chair, and for the next 53 seconds or something, the longest 53 seconds of my life and everybody else's, it literally felt like there was a steam train or a train going over the top of you. So really loud, like this. So and of course. And you're thinking, okay, is the building going to come down, or is it going to? Because it feels like that's going to happen. Yeah.
Do you still remember exactly at that point?
Yeah.
Let's say the exact moment. What was coming through your head?
I know exactly what was coming from my head.
You know.
Yeah.
What was it?
I was pretty annoyed with God, actually, because I always thought I had an agreement with God that. The major earthquake that we were expecting wouldn't happen while I was in charge of UMN.
Mm.
And then here was the major earthquake happening. And I was thinking...
Yeah.
Obviously, I was also thinking about family and that kind of... But strangely enough, I went into... Very quickly, I went into, okay, this is...
My responsibility.
Exactly, that's right. So the 53 seconds comes to an end, and the funny thing was that so I wasn't looking up at all. I was just looking down and had my eyes closed. So when I looked up, I realised that everybody, apart from Liz, my wife, and one other person, one of our hospital directors, had run out of the room. Because most of them had kids, and they went and picked up their kids and they ran outside, which is not what you're supposed to do, because it's very dangerous because things fall off the roof and that kind of. Yeah. But you can totally understand it.
Yep.
So that was quite amusing that there were just the three of us, and and Liz was desperately holding on to the leg of the hospital director. Mm. Anyway, so we went outside, obviously worked out if everybody was okay. None of the buildings had come down in the hotel that we were in, and actually we were quite far, even though it had seemed very, very strong.
Yeah.
We'd been quite far from the epicenter where it had occurred, which was further back towards Kathmandu. There's a blackout of communication, so obviously our first concern was what had happened to other locations, so the hospitals that we were at, the office in Kathmandu. We wanted to know what had happened to Josh, because Kathmandu is very, very vulnerable. And eventually, amazingly, after about an hour or so, the comms went back up again. But everybody is phoning everybody across the country. And so it's totally blocked. But miraculously, we were able to get a message from Josh, and he's
all right.
To say he's okay. Miri had been in another part of the hotel, and so we managed. We sort of
find her
and stuff like that. The challenge and something that I didn't get right was I I was responsible for the organisation, and so I had to, get things on the road in terms of working out what the next steps were. However, I was also a father and a husband, and getting that balance and the next few weeks to couple of months
must be a real challenge.
Huge challenge to get that balance.
Okay.
Providing the support, and yet you are, you're all suffering from sort of the trauma of the earthquake that you've been through, and yet you're expected to function at a very high level.
Wow.
You've got the pressure, so everybody is communicating in from outside, and wanting to know if you're okay, which is great, and obviously it was on the world news and stuff like that because it was a big earthquake. But then there's the pressure of, what are you doing as an organisation? You exist to.
It's for that moment that you're there, actually, isn't it?
Well, in some ways, yeah. I mean, we were doing long-term development work, but obviously, and actually, the epicenter had occurred very close to some of our working areas, and so while the damage in the area that we had been in wasn't significant, there had been whole villages that were completely wiped out. So immediately we had to. I remember actually the expectation was in about 24 hours we had to send some sort of communication as to what we were going to do, because organisations that supported us were receiving all this money and all these calls saying, have you got anybody in Nepal? We want to give money. We want to, and in order to, so, you have no, what are we going to do? I don't know. You've done some planning, you've done some scenario thinking, which is helpful. But
it's very different when it actually happens, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And now, I mean, I already know your thought on this because I already asked you once, but I think it would be good for listeners to grasp a little bit of that as well. Is that in that sort of, let's say, scenario when something like that happens, right?
Yeah.
A lot of organisations, they come in straight away, boom. Yeah. And I know because the Morocco one that happened last year.
Yeah.
I went there and I spoke with you literally straight. What should I do? What should I be looking for? How should I do it? Yeah. And you gave me some really good advice. So when you were there, how was it for you then, knowing that a lot of people come in, and maybe you can even give us a little bit of your approach. I'm trying to really pick you. No, because I mean, you are an expert on this, Mark, and community development, and you also, and the approach you take, and I know it's based on integral mission, and I would really love to hear that, and I think that would really be helpful as well for people that are listening.
Yeah.
How is it then for you at that moment when people are coming in, and a lot of people are like, okay, this is the moment we're going to preach the gospel to these people, and then you give them food and you preach the gospel. How does it? What's the right? If there's a right way, what would be the right way? Yeah. And what's your view on that?
Great questions. Okay, let me. I'll go back and tell it sort of how it happened and draw out some of those things. So
that'd be good.
Yeah. So you have the organisations that are wanting you to respond, and obviously you've got to get that together. In any major disaster, particularly what we call a rapid onset disaster, something that happens quickly that you don't have any warning about, you then get the emergency organisations coming in, who are they're highly trained expertise. People who are going to pull people out of the rubble, the relief organisations and that kind of thing. You get some people who come in literally just for a few days post-earthquake who do the pulling out of the rubble and then they go home again. Others who are there for a little bit longer with helping with, distributing food, tarpaulins, blankets, medicine, this kind of stuff.
More just the relief phase.
Yeah, the relief phase, exactly. You get Christian organisations, of course. You get the UN coming in and all the apparatus of the UN who sort of coordinate things centrally. Yeah. But a huge influx, and you've got these huge tensions then between the government, who is obviously, trying to cope with this, respond to the situation, maintain control and be in charge, and the tensions with the UN, who perhaps are all also, have a significant role to play, and the coordination between them. So you also get you get the sort of professional organisations that come in, and the Christian professional organisations that come in, and then you get quite a lot of well-intentioned people who have some experience of relief. They've done something elsewhere, you know, they had a contact in Haiti or wherever it was, so they went and that led them to sort of set up. And they come in with very good intentions, but no understanding at all of the context. So I remember sitting in a room with about, I think it was about 30 other people who were heading up organisations. I was the only one in the room who'd been there for longer than about 2 weeks, and this was about sort of 2 weeks post-earthquake. And, you know, you had people say, oh, well, our relief distributions are going well, but, you know, we didn't realise Nepal was such a hilly country. It's very basic knowledge about Nepal.
Yeah.
And obviously they've come in very rapidly, so they don't have time to sort of do the research and that kind of thing. So one of the tensions that arises in these kind of situations is this whole issue of proclamation.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm advocate in holistic or integral mission.
Yeah.
And we can talk about definitions of that, but basically that, yes, we should be demonstrating, we should be proclaiming, we should be living out, our whole lives should be centered on Christ, and that key part of that is proclaiming verbally. I'm not a gifted evangelist myself, but I have a responsibility to give a reason for the hope that is within me. That's totally part of it. But the problem is that people often have an understanding of integral mission, which is about balance. That you've got evangelism over here and you've got social action over here, and somehow we've got to get a balance between the two. Now that is a part of the sort of sacred secular divide in our thinking that's very, very deeply embedded in our thinking. And if you come in with that thinking into an earthquake scenario, what you try and do, if you're not careful, is it's all about me getting this balance. So therefore, yes, I'm going to do my relief distributions. So that's about giving out. That's the social action. But as I am doing it, I also need to be preaching. Okay. So in some context, doing those two things side by side might be appropriate. In the case of Nepal, it definitely wasn't. And there are several reasons for that. One is that it was quite a sensitive context. It's a sort of what I would term a semi-restrictive context. I knew that the government was watching very, very carefully and was very suspicious. Even in normal times, the government was very suspicious about Christian organisations. And this idea that there is proselytization going, so people are being induced to convert, because in the Hindu worldview there is no possibility of conversion, so you have to be coercing somebody if they are to convert. So the government's watching very, very closely for this. The local church, who are very, very active in post-earthquake, partly because they'd been trained up in how to respond in these kind of situations, had taken a very strong position and said, this is not the time to proclaim. This is the time to meet people's social needs, their physical needs.
So that's the way the church reacted.
That is the way that the church reacted. So they said, we have been proclaiming and we will proclaim again, but now
is the time for the,
because they knew also that any proclamation on their point would be misinterpreted and would be seen, and perhaps validly, as exploiting the vulnerability that people are feeling. Now, it's interesting because in that context, people are spiritually open. So it's not about hiding your Christian identity. But when you get to sort of, inserting tracts in relief bags and that kind of thing, that can very, very easily backfire and lead to the suppression of kind of all good works of Christians, and government throwing not only that organisation who've been doing it out, but also all the other organisations, and actually, having a very long-term impact. And there are other examples that I could share, not so much from my own experience, of significant harm being done because people are trying to do integral mission. They're trying to do both at the same time.
We actually also lived a bit of that ourselves when we were on the Logos Hope ship. There was one time I remember we were in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and it wasn't the earthquake; it was the volcano. Volcano erupted, and I remember this. I remember Jessica, because Jessica's responsible for the outreach ministry of the ship, and basically, you know, something happened there that one of the guys who were part of the community said, "Okay, we need to," but he was also part of sort of politics within the country. And he was hosting us, and he was saying, "Okay, for you to get this, you needed to get the food bags and stuff, the water stuff that we were giving, but you have to take a picture." And I remember Jessica going crazy about it. She was literally going crazy, saying, "We can't do that. That's wrong. We cannot do that. It's not a moment." And Jessica would feel embarrassed because the women, they were all badly dressed, you know, and having
just been through a volcano.
and having to smile for a picture because you're getting some parcel of food. So yeah, I do relate to what you're saying, and being through that experience myself, and I know how bad it looks and how harmful it is. And Mark, you know, it is it's just really good to hear these stories from you and all the experience, and I'm sure that how all of that shaped you into becoming who you are today. And I mean, of course, a lot more stuff that you went through in Nepal as well, you know, the ministry that you were involved there. So fast forwarding a little bit into the time that you actually decided to come to All Nations and teach at All Nations. So maybe you can give us a little bit of your background in the sense of what you studied and what you teach today. And then I'll ask a couple of questions within that.
So my main areas that I teach on are what we call the poverty and justice side of things. So primarily kind of community development side of things, so more at the grassroots. Also a module called Integral Mission Foundations and Practice, where we look at this idea of holistic or integral mission. What does that look like in practice? What are the different aspects of mission that we hold together, etc. And then I also teach on the leadership side of things. And of course, the leadership side of things is primarily from experience. And then my background education, as we've covered, sort of came from the agricultural side, but more the social side, and therefore led into the community development. So I'm teaching things that I'm passionate about. I'm teaching things that I have lived out. You know, it's not just theory. It's hence all of the stories, which I have to, you know, apologise for occasionally, but students seem to enjoy them. So that's a great privilege, you know, to be able to share and shape students, and you know that they're and have them come back a few years later, or even email you going, say, "Mark, I'm using the stuff that you've learnt. You've said that in the past, you know, that you learnt on the ship."
One of my biggest regrets was not taking your community development.
I told you should have done, my friend. I told you.
Jessica took them all, but I didn't because I was focused on something else. But I did take the leadership one, and it did really, really help me when I was leading a team, a multicultural team. It's very different when you're leading a multicultural team, and that really is a big challenge. And I remember just really, you know, remembering the stuff that we studied in class, and just being able to use that. Okay, let me go back to that. Let me go back to this principle, to that, and just being able to use that. And even today, you know, sometimes you invite me to go to. Examples
exactly. We got some fantastic experience to share now.
Yeah, that was really, really encouraging for me. But I do regret not taking your modules though. It's a big regret for me.
Anyway, note everyone.
Exactly. Now, Mark, we have to come to an end, unfortunately. I'd love to hear a lot more, and also you've got a lot more to share. But if there is one thing that you could inspire today the listeners that are listening to us today to get involved, or something that would really inspire them for global mission, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think the word that comes to mind for me is privilege and excitement. So let me explain what I mean by that. So privilege, just, you know, if we think about it, so it's not our mission, it's God's mission. You know, and he invites us to participate in his mission. And that is just the most remarkable privilege, isn't it? To think that God wants us to be involved in what he's doing, and actually requires us to be involved as well. And that's not in our own strength. You know, he equips those he calls.
Yeah.
And you know, if I had known what I would go through, what we would go through as a family when we went to Nepal, the you know, mundane things and the more challenging, we probably never would have gone. But he equips those that he calls. So we're not doing it in our strength. And so it's incredibly exciting. You know, we get to have experiences. And this is not the motivation for doing it, but the reality is that joining in with what God is doing exciting things.
I like that way you just
so,
said, joining in with what God is already doing.
It's my favourite definition of mission.
Yeah.
So the excitement, you know, of joining in with what God is doing, which is exciting.
Yeah.
You know, the restoration of the whole of creation. So I think you know, we can be hesitant about that because we think, well, can I play a part in this? Absolutely, you can, because you don't do it in your own strength. That, you know, and we can do it in all different spheres. We don't have to go, you know, halfway across the world to do it. So privilege, excitement, and I think a thing that I often say to students, and I'll finish with this, is that God calls us. Because of what he wants to do through us, but as much as that, it's about what he wants to do in us.
I really like that now. Yeah.
So we are shaped as we are called, and as we work out that calling, and that's amazing, isn't it?
No, I think that's more than amazing, really, because I mean, what you said is you literally hit it on the nail. You know, we think that we are the ones going to give, but when you're there, you realize that actually you're receiving a lot more than you're actually giving.
Absolutely.
And that's the beauty of really serving Christ and serving global missions, really.
That's right.
Yeah. Man, it was amazing. Mark, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. It takes some time to be with us here. It was really, really great. I was able to learn some things of you that I'd never even heard. You know, and we've already been spending 7 years together. It was lovely, mate. Thank you so much, and I'm sure people are going to really enjoy it, and I'm going to really take to heart what you shared. Thank you for everything that you have been doing, not just for the college today, but also, you know, in your ministry and everything that God has called you to do, and the way you have been impacting people's lives. So I thank you so much for that. And
thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, so send big love to Liz and the kids, and hope to see you again soon.